Let's talk motor units. And we'll start by looking at the lower motor neurons and look at how they synapse onto muscle fibers. So if we zoom in here, okay, we're going to zoom in. As always, I like to start with the pictures. So if we zoom in on the picture here, what we're going to see, so remember that we're going to have our upper motor tracts that are going to be descending downward, right? So those upper motor tracts are going to descend downward, and some of them are going to be involved in activating those lower motor neurons. The lower motor neurons have the cell body here in the spinal cord, and the axon from that cell body exits the ventral horn. And notice it's myelinated. I will emphasize that because that's important. And this myelinated neuron travels to its target effector cell, which in this case is a skeletal muscle. Now I want you to look at these branches. It's heavily branched. This actually is not, comparatively speaking. This one only has a handful of branches, maybe 2 handfuls of branches. And then its synapses, you can see the little synaptic regions where we form these synapses, these synaptic terminals, like so. Now, each of these branches will synapse with a different muscle fiber. So right here, for example, let me switch to highlighter mode. Oops, let me switch to little tiny highlighter mode. Okay. This particular branch here would activate this one muscle fiber, like so. And that's an important thing to realize, that these branches, as they spread out, they're going to activate individual muscle fibers. Now, some of these branches are mind-blowing. So we can have as many as, I think in some instances, upward of 3,000 branches, 500 branches. Or we can have, as we see here, just this maybe a dozen. I haven't counted them, but it looks like a dozen just eyeballing it to me. And so what happens here is, what we see here is what's called a motor unit, where a motor unit has one neuron and however many fibers we see here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I guess that works for me. So 10 fibers, or however many are there. If we zoom in over here, we can see a close-up of those nerve terminals. And I want you to notice their shape. They're very interesting. So this would be one of many branches. So we'd have other branches off over here. Okay, so imagine that. All right. And then as we get down to the synaptic terminal, even the synaptic terminal is branched. So we have, in this example, 3 synapses being formed. Okay, 3 of these synapses be formed. I always thought that they looked like little frog toes. If you've ever seen a tree frog, that's what they look like to me. And look at this. This particular synapse is synapsing onto this muscle fiber. Okay, this is a muscle cell right there. And so this one will activate the cell that it's synapsed onto. And then here's another one. And again, this is going to activate. If we were to number these, we could go 1, 2, 3, and likewise number this as being 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this one branch activates 3 muscle fibers. Okay. Notice it's not activating every muscle fiber in that region. Okay, This one's not activated. Neither is this one. Neither is this one. But 1, 2, and 3 would be activated simultaneously every time an action potential would be generated and travel down that particular branch of the motor neuron. Okay. The neuron plus the muscle fibers it innervates is my motor unit. Okay, that's my motor unit. The neuron plus the muscle fibers it innervates, that's my motor unit. And it's always one neuron to however many however many muscle fibers. You never ever have a situation where you have two neurons that synapse onto the same fiber. Okay, it's not going to happen. We're not going to have another motor unit with a synapse right there. Doesn't happen. Okay. And so that's an important distinction and thing to realize and understand that. And I bring that up because we are going to later on talk about summation and how summation works to activate these muscle fibers. And in skeletal muscle, we can get temporal, but not spatial. But not spatial summation. And that should become more clear to you as we go on. Let's keep talking about these motor units. Here we've got these color-coded units. And we have separated out the muscle cells. So you can see my individual muscle fibers. This particular group of muscle fibers will go ahead and it's going to be activated by the neuron that is color-coded green. Okay, and so you can see that the green neuron will activate these three muscle fibers. Okay. And what that means is that every time the green neuron generates action potentials, and assuming we reach threshold, more on that in a bit, these muscle fibers will, all three of them, simultaneously contract. Okay, all three of them will experience an action potential which will lead to the shortening of that muscle fiber. Okay. And likewise, if we were to get the purple neuron activated, the purple muscle fibers contract. Now in this particular figure that we're looking at on the left, we have three muscle fibers in green, and so we would say that's a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 fibers per 1 neuron. And that's how we would describe that motor unit. Whereas the purple one is, in this example, a 2-to-1 ratio. As you can see, there's 2 fibers. However, in the graph that I'm going to show you on the right, we're going to assume that these motor units are the same. Because what I want to teach you about is something called graded contractions, and a related term called recruitment. If you consider a muscle, if we were to take a cross section, for example, of the bicep, one of the biceps, if we were to take a cross section of that and look at that, okay, we would see hundreds of individual muscle fibers within that bicep. And those muscle fibers would each be innervated. They'd be part of their very own motor unit. We know that our contractions are graded, and by graded I mean we can have, let's look, if we were to look at generation of force, we can generate a little tiny bit of force, a little bit more 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 force. And the force that we generate is proportional to the amount of work that we need to do. So if I'm lifting up my cell phone and I'm using that those biceps to lift that phone, okay, it's not going to take a lot of muscle power, right? But on the other hand, if I were trying to lift a 20-pound weight, I need more muscles to fire. And if I were going to lift a 50-pound weight, so imagine if I'm doing curls, right? I would need even more muscle fibers to fire. And so to get this type of graded contraction, here's how it works. If we assume that the motor units are all the same size, now that's an oversimplification, they're not necessarily that, but to help you understand this process, if we assume that both the green and the purple are 3-to-1, for example, well, in that case, if I contract only the green motor unit, so that's the green motor neuron plus the green muscle fibers, okay? If I contract only those, then I might generate the tension shown in the green bar right here, okay? And so tension, force, pick your poison, both of them are the same. So this would be my force generated by the contraction or the activation of only one motor unit. On the other hand, if I were to just contract the purple one but not the green one, we'd get a similar force. Okay, this would be my similar force of contraction for my for my purple motor unit. Okay, so it's the same amount of force, same amount of tension that we can generate through the contraction of a different motor unit in the same region. But if I contract them both together, you can see I get this summation. Okay, this force adds together, and so now I get double the amount of tension that I can generate. And this is essentially how we control how much force that we can generate at any given time. If I want just a little force, I'm going to activate one motor unit. If I want a little bit more, I'm going to activate 2. If I want a little bit more, I'm going to activate 3. Okay? And the definition of recruitment is the process that we use to activate more muscle fibers. Okay? We activate the amount of muscle fibers, we recruit, that's how we would use that word. We recruit the muscle fibers, or we recruit the motor units that are necessary to accomplish our goal. Whether it's simply to hold a child so we don't drop them, or whether it's to pick up a cell phone, or whether it's to launch a ball across the yard. In all of those cases, we generate the appropriate amount of force by activating the appropriate amount of motor units. And so it's graded. It depends on how much force we need to generate. If we are going to carry a load for a long period of time, we run into a problem. And that problem is that skeletal muscle fatigues. We're going to be talking about the mechanism of skeletal muscle contraction and the mechanism of skeletal muscle fatigue when we get to our skeletal muscle section. For right now, you just need to know that they fatigue. Okay, they get tired, and when they fatigue, they cannot generate the same amount of force that they normally can. The strength of the muscle lessens. Okay, the power of that muscle lessens. And so if I want to carry something for a long distance, and I don't want to drop this thing that I'm carrying, maybe it's a child, and dropping children is frowned upon. And so we're going to use my muscles to carry this kid without dropping him. But my muscles are in fact going to get fatigued. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. We're going to use a process called asynchronous motor unit recruitment, or summation. And what this is going to do is, if we take a look at this example here, and we're going to look at motor unit 1, which is going to be color-coded in red, and motor unit 2, which is color-coded in blue, and motor unit 3, which is color-coded in pink. Sure, I don't really have a good pink, do I? Anyway, color-coded in pink. Okay, is that different enough that you can tell? I don't know. But anyway, these 3 motor units, and we're going to assume that they're approximately the same size. So let's pretend, if you will, just to simplify your understanding of this, let's pretend that carrying my child requires the activation of a single motor unit. It sure as heck doesn't. She's a heavy kid. But we're going to pretend for simplification purposes. So carrying my child without dropping her requires the maximum amount of tension that is possible from a single motor unit. So we're going to contract that muscle, and we're going to get maximal contraction. But as that muscle is contracted, as those motor units are contracted, and so it wouldn't actually be one muscle fiber, it would be one, shouldn't do pink, sorry. Let's go to red. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've got the 6 to 1. So every time the red neuron fires, I get 6 muscle fibers that contract, and we're going to say maximal contraction, so they shorten as much as they possibly can. I will be able to sustain that contraction perhaps for a short time, maybe a minute or two. Okay? At which point that muscle will start to fatigue. So let's follow along here. So I contract that muscle and I generate some force. I sustain that force, but now look, I start to fatigue, and as I start to fatigue, my strength disappears. And at some point, if that was the only part of the story, I would drop my kid. Fortunately, I have these other motor units that I can activate. So as motor unit 1, as those muscle fibers start to fatigue, we're going to activate motor unit 2. And I have another 6 muscle fibers to take over. And those will sustain the contraction, but then those start to fatigue. And again, if that were all she wrote, if I did not have, I guess it's purple, not pink, if I did not have another set of muscle fibers, then I would drop my kid. But fortunately I do, and so motor unit 3 would cycle on, and I have another set of fresh muscle fibers, 6 of them, to help carry my child. Now meanwhile, it's been a couple minutes since I've had to activate motor unit 1. And so in those couple minutes, motor unit 1 has rebuilt its supply of ATP, and it's ready to go again. So as soon as my purple one starts to contract, motor unit 1 cycles on and generates contraction. So the purple one fatigues, motor unit 1 cycles on. Meanwhile, my blue motor units have also rested, and they've generated more ATP, and they're ready to go again. And so when my red motor units start to fatigue, my red muscle fibers do, the blue ones cycle on again. And we continue this process, which each motor unit cycling on to maintain the contraction for a long period of time. And so with this process, we can carry our loads for long distances. Some muscles are better at this than others. The ones that really shine for prolonged work are what we call our short, oh, for heaven's sakes. Slow twitch muscles, sorry. Slow twitch muscles. Okay. We'll talk more about these when we get to our skeletal muscle unit. Fast twitch don't do quite as well. They slow twitch are fatigue resistance, fast twitch are not. But we would still, the principle is the same regardless, that if we want a longer sustained contraction, we're going to engage in this asynchronous recruitment to activate different sets of muscle fibers. So in areas of our body where we need fine motor control, we tend to have smaller ratios. So things like the eyes, we have a ratio, our eyes have a lot of fine control. We usually don't think about it, but they actually do. Fun little fact, just for your fun little trivia game if you ever want to know it. We actually don't do a really good job of seeing things that are not moving. Our eyes are built to see movement. And so if I have this little black line, it's not moving. So for me to see it, your muscles in your eyes actually twitch a little bit, and they kind of scribble. If we look at their focal point and where we're actually looking, kind of scribble our eyes back and forth because the line's not moving, but our eyes can. And so we scribble our vision back and forth around it to make out anything that is staying still. We see movement a lot better. So that's just a fun, for your curiosity, interesting little kind of tidbit of information. All right. So our eye muscles, we would say in this example, might have, for example, a 23-to-1 relationship, 23 muscle fibers to 1 neuron. Okay. Whereas maybe in our hands, depending on how we train our hands, if we're a surgeon, for example, we will have trained the muscles in our hands, and neurons are what we call plastic, which means while we don't grow new neurons, we do in fact grow new branches and new axons and new dendrites. Those grow. And so, based on how we learn to use our muscles, we might have very fine control in our hands. And so we could have, 10-to-1, 3-to-1. Don't know if they get any smaller than that. And so we can generate these little teeny tiny bits of force, which is certainly necessary when we're doing surgery as we're trying to make these tiny incisions. We want to have a lot of control. If we do too much force, we could cut somebody wide open, right? That would be a problem. And so in areas that need fine motor control, we have these smaller ratios of muscle fibers to neurons. It looks like I've got a typo here. This shouldn't say motor units, it should say motor neurons. So please correct that typo in your notes. However, if we want power and strength, we're going to need these large motor units. We're going to need relationships such as 500-to-1. If I'm remembering correctly, my quads are more on the lines of 3,000-to-1. Okay? And that means I'm activating 3,000 muscle fibers with 1 neuron. And that will give me tremendous power and strength, but it does not give me fine control. There's this control and strength trade-off. You can't have both. Okay? Yes, you can strengthen your hands with different hand exercises, but no matter how strong your hands are, you're probably not going to be able to use your hands and only your hands to propel your body over long distances, right? Imagine running a marathon on your hands. It's not going to happen. Imagine doing the long jump on your hands. Okay, not happening. You need your power, but it's a trade-off. You can't have powerful and fine control at the same time.